understanding of death has changed dramatically in the last 100 years.
I'm wondering what happens when we die.
So I have been on a journey to try to answer that one impossible question, and it's taken me to a lot of interesting places. Questions drive our show, and this one comes from a YouTube viewer from Norway.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great. About your question.
What is that one question that everyone wants to know, but no one has the answer to? I've lost a lot of people. Someone I know really closely who's been like a mother figure to me just got terminal cancer, and she has like a couple weeks left now. I don't want to sit here and think that they just like die sadly and fall into emptiness. I'm super terrified of dying.
So I'm not trying to prove the afterlife. That's unknowable. But what if modern science could reveal what we'll experience in the final moments of our lives? More people are searching for what happens at the end of our lives. So we're gonna figure that out.
You're gonna figure out what happens when we die.
I already have. When Hella brought this question to me, I started digging, and one thing that kept popping up was this video on a dog that was brought back to life. In 1926, a scientist came up with an experiment that would redefine the way we interpret the process of dying. Dr. Sergei Brukhonenko drained dogs of blood, and they died while connected to his new machine, the autojector. They stopped breathing, and then their heartbeat ended. They were believed to be completely dead. Then the doctors waited. After 10 minutes without a heartbeat or breathing, the autojector cycled their bodies with reoxygenated arterial blood, and then the dogs came back to life. And over time, they made a full recovery. The dog experiment shows us that death was not just a moment in time, but it was a long process. So that raised the question, if death is a process, at what point do we truly die? In the case of the dog, that dog was actually never dead at all. He had never died.
What was he?
Allow me to explain.
That's a transition.
So what I have here are some custom Glad You Asked tarot cards.
Okay.
I picked these because we tend to search for answers in the supernatural, but there's still so much to be learned from science. For most of human existence, life was thought to reside in two organs. You got the heart, and you got the lungs. Do you have any idea why?
Those seem to be the ways that we can tell if someone is dead from the outside. If they're breathing, you can feel their heartbeat.
Exactly. For thousands of years, we considered somebody dead if they had no pulse and they weren't breathing. But these signs can be misleading as people can actually recover from both. This led to fears of being buried alive. John-Jacques Winslow, a medical expert of his time, stated that the safest way to define death was putrefaction of the body, or decomposition. But we still relied on that heart-lung definition. Without signs of either, you're considered clinically dead. In the last 100 years, that started to change. In the 30s and 40s, two new machines were commonly used to extend life. We got the defibrillator that could restart the heart and the iron lung, followed by the respirator that could pump the lungs with air. At around the same time, we used another machine, the EEG, to study electrical signals in the brain. The brain will flatline within 2 to 20 seconds on an EEG once the heart stops beating. So if each of these organs was not required to be working all the time for you to be alive, maybe we had to start thinking about death differently. In 1978, President Carter mandated a commission to study and define death. He hoped to find a modern definition which took into account recent medical advances. In 1981, they published their report defining death. This led to the act that hospitals today use, making the old definition of death obsolete. The focus shifted over to this, the brain. This became the final indicator of whether you were alive or dead. Now, there are levels to this, the higher and the lower brain. Most medical experts today say that once you lose higher level brain functionality, which is where logical thinking and personality reside, you are considered dead. You are dead even if some of the lower level brain functions, those controlled by the brainstem like breathing, still persist.
So you can be brain dead, but still be breathing, have a heartbeat, everything.
Totally. And that gets into kind of murky territory with how we define death. So to answer what happens when we die, we have to focus on one thing, getting as close as possible to the final moments of life to see what we feel and experience in those moments. here.
The near-death experience.
So I started researching NDEs. They're in medieval accounts and as far back as the writings of Plato. They're in the artwork of Bosch from 500 years ago. They're seeing a bright light. They're going through a tunnel. They're hearing voices and communicating with the dead. To help go through the research, I'm getting Joss to help me dive in. Hey, Joss. I need your help.
Okay.
So I've been looking into near-death experiences. Maybe there's a medical reason why these things are happening.
So just kind of survey whatever research is out there on how legit these experiences are.
Research. While Joss is looking at NDE experiments, I'm getting some caffeine and researching the history, the controversies, and cultural impact of near-death experiences. First, history. 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody publishes a book, Life After Life. He coins the phrase near-death experience. Over the next 2 decades, he's established as the preeminent expert on NDEs. He proclaims the transformative effects of NDEs and becomes the subject of this 1992 documentary.
Once they come back, they tell us that they're totally transformed and they have no more doubt whatsoever.
It's ingrained into the public consciousness. Even celebrities are saying they've had them.
It's just a lot of white light, and you see people that have passed on. And
when you're in a coma for 8 to 10 days, you basically knocking on the door. I was talking to my dad.
I sort of floated into this tunnel.
YouTube data shared with us indicated that between 2017 and 2018, views on videos related to death increased by 40%. So clearly, a lot of people have questions about death, and one of the phenomena they're looking at is near-death experiences. All right, that's enough internet. I need to find an actual experiencer and talk to them. I'm on my way to meet with Tony Sikoria. He's an orthopedic surgeon who in 1994 was struck by lightning and experienced an NDE. But something weird happened to Tony. Tony became obsessed with music and started to play it all the time, and today he is a renowned composer.
It's 1994. I'm at a family gathering, and I tried to call my mom. I took the phone away from my face. I was going to hang it back up, and I heard this huge, loud crack. And I saw this big flash of light come out of the phone and hit me right in the face. And it just threw me back like a rag doll. And I was confronted with myself on the ground about 10 feet away. And, you know, the first thought that popped into my head was, oh, I'm dead. And I'm looking down at the ground, and I notice that my legs are dissolving.
You're seeing your body on the ground.
Yeah.
You're feeling yourself outside of your body, but you still feel yourself walking and present.
Yeah, that was really weird. I was just a ball of energy. And right about the time I realized that this is the greatest thing that could ever happen to anyone. It was like somebody flipped a switch, and bam, I was back in that body. I was pissed. Some circuits got fried and some that got opened, and I had access to parts of my brain that I didn't know existed for me. But then within a couple of weeks, all of a sudden I started to have this insatiable desire to hear piano music.
Being struck by lightning, having an NDE, didn't give you instant superpowers.
I wish it had given me superpowers. I was skeptical. I was a scientist before I went into medicine. I thought about things, and there has to be a structure to follow. But I'm absolutely certain that consciousness survives death, and that we keep going through the cycle.
It doesn't seem like you're afraid of dying today.
No, and that's a blessing and a curse. I think that there's a process that happens as we approach death. It's an incredible experience. It's certainly not something to do before it's time to do it, but it's also something to not be afraid of.
That was great. I'm about to speak with Dr. Pim Ben Lommel. and he is a scientist from the Netherlands who has been tracking near-death experiences for years. Hello, Dr. Van Lommel.
Yes, that's me. We succeeded to contact.
Yes. How would you define near-death experience?
Well, near-death experience is the reported memory of a special state of consciousness and with universal elements like being aware of being dead, having an out-of-body experience so you can perceive from above your lifeless body with a CPR or a surgery.
I think there's a lot of studies out there that have tried to prove that near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences exist. Have you heard of Dr. Parnia's AWARE study?
What he's trying to do in his AWARE study is trying to get objective proof of out-of-body experiences.
So I asked you to look into this AWARE case.
Yes. This was the largest scientific study of near-death experiences. I put together a little model of their experimental method.
You made this yourself?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time making this.
It's amazing.
You better like it. So this is a hospital room where patients were likely to experience cardiac arrest. Medical professionals would be rushing in and trying to resuscitate this person. And in those rooms, they installed a shelf near the ceiling and placed a picture on top of that shelf. And the idea was that if someone was going through an out-of-body experience, they often claim that they're looking at themselves from the top of the ceiling, that they would be able to see this picture and report back what they saw. During this study period, around 2,000 patients had cardiac arrests, but only one of them was healthy enough to explain an out-of-body experience. But they didn't have a shelf in his room. So the study was inconclusive on out-of-body experiences, since nobody could describe the picture on the shelf.
When you focus on something, you miss other things. And when you're out of your body, surprising, seeing your own resuscitation, you don't start to look around if there somewhere is a hidden sign. We could not find any medical, psychological, physiological, pharmacological explanation why people have these experiences. We cannot prove nor objectify subjective experiences.
I spoke to a indie experiencer. His name is Tony Sikoria.
Oh, yes, I know.
What does that tell you about how influential these experiences are?
Everything is connected. It's just not to be explained by materialist science.
This is definitely not what all of us experience at the end of life. And I've been looking at this other case that does tell you what might be happening at the end of life for all of us. A researcher up in Buffalo has been looking at these cases for the past 5 years.
So you're going to Buffalo?
Going to Buffalo. So after a long trip, we finally arrived over at Hospice Buffalo. We're good? Thank you. The thing that makes this facility so special is they've been cataloging the dreams and end-of-life visions of patients. So these patients will tell us what they're experiencing at the very final moments of their lives.
Sorry, can we just talk for a second? We're just filming. Oh. We go this way to our inpatient unit.
Okay.
In each area, there's little coves where people can hang. And there's an English garden out here, so we actually push people in their beds outside.
Hi.
Hi, Helen. I'm Alex.
Hi.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well.
You're a good Polish girl, I see.
Yes, I am. Polish and Serbian.
Have you been having unusual dreams at all?
No.
No, nothing.
No, nothing.
It tends to come as people are closer to dying. But you're too healthy. You've got time. I did the first study that attempted to quantify what happens to people at the end of life by asking patients directly, what is it you're experiencing every day until death? And so attempting to put definition around what people were feeling or experiencing as they were dying. It went like fire around the world.
A doctor at a hospice in Buffalo has been studying this for years.
He and his team have documented 1,400 cases.
He says the dreams are comforting to the dying.
New York Times, Huffington Post a couple of times, Ireland, China, India, you name it, it's been there. And it just keeps growing.
What did you start to discover when you were looking at the research?
That was remarkable. People were having these very intense experiences. We call them dreams because it's the only reference point we have. But the thing we hear most commonly from patients is, no, you don't understand. This is different than any other dream I had. This happened.
When I woke up, it was like they were there, all three of them together. Yeah. And it was nice.
The vast majority of people, greater than 80%, if you ask them, for weeks.
80%?
Yeah, at least having one experience that was distinct and different from normal dreaming. Heightened acuity, clear thinking. In fact, half the people said they weren't asleep. And in terms of themes, far and away it was seeing the deceased, some living, past meaningful experience.
I'm back in the service. I'm at Fort Devens up in Massachusetts.
When you dream, you kind of put things together and it's all a fog. Right. That's not what happens. This is recalled as though it's a lived event.
I was laying in bed and people were walking very slowly by me. My mom and dad were there, my uncle. Everybody I knew that was dead was there.
There's this kind of paradox, right? You're physically dying, but inside you're very much alive and feeling. We all have wounds for having lived, and they just seem to kind of get addressed.
I can't say that my mother and I got along all those years, but we made up for it at the end.
Paul is my dad. He was 82 when he passed away about 6.5 years ago. There was this study going on, and we were looking into dreams and dying and so forth. He, of course, said yes.
They were forming this company that we were going to oversee, a new company. And the guys are all young. They're like, I remember them, and I'm old. And I'm trying to tell them, guys, I've been here, I've done this, I'm not going to do it again. And here I go.
Do you think that he was okay with death when it finally came?
I think he had come to grips with death. He took comfort in the dreams that he had. I think sometimes in his dreams he was kind of wrapping things up, like getting closure with his buddies in the service. He was not afraid. This was good.
Dying's a process. We tend to view death as that last gasp, that grabbing of the chest, what have you. Most dying is less dramatic. It's quieter, it's gentler, it's more natural.
Dr. Kerr's study suggests that the majority of the dying may eventually have ELDVs. In his 2014 study, he found that more than 80% of his patients had these vivid experiences. And this isn't just happening in America. These stars represent a few of the areas where ELDVs have been recognized. A Swiss study found 9 out of 10 patients in palliative care experienced these very real dreams and visions before dying.
What happens when you die is you will experience absolute love and peace. It's going to be an earth-shaking feeling and freedom.
It tends to bring folks this comfort or closure. They're made whole again.
All this process with making this video is totally changing how I view that. And I don't think that I am as scared of it now.
So of course there's more research to be done. But maybe our brains, faced with the specter of no longer existing, are stepping in to prepare us at the end by revealing what life was all about. And if that's the case, we don't need to be afraid, because if we're lucky, we'll be ready.
Everybody dies. We just don't know where, when, or how. But I'm 92, so I think it's time for me to go.
This is a copper casket, truly copper.
Wow, it's like memory foam. Sorry to laugh. Almost like a really soft mattress.
It's a mattress.